Okay. So good morning, everybody. We're back at Vacant Land Contracts Part 2. If you guys need a contract, they're over here. And those of you who have missed us on Vacant Land Contracts Part 1, let us know if we need to catch you back up. I did not put it back on Google yet and YouTube yet because YouTube keeps censoring me, but I will probably try to put it up there. So I wanted to first start because where we're at is the part of the contract that goes into property condition. And as you may have remembered, we started talking about there's different things that you have to look at when you're going to be studying land. And that's where we go into this due diligence period. And I started telling you about a story. There's a story. And the story was about a builder. And I wanted to share some information. So I'm going to share this screen. And here it is. Here's some fabulous stories. There it is. It's Lennar that built homes. Over 400 live bombs were found. Yep. And there was some serious lawsuits going on here. I'm going to tell you that right now. But it was built over the Warwick area of Vista Lakes, and it was also on Odyssey Middle School. So there was lawsuits from the Department of Education. There was lawsuits from the Homeowners Association. They sold more than 400 homes on this whole bombing range. Can you imagine? This is what happens. And it wasn't even only just the unexploded bombs. There was also toxic chemicals in there as well because of the bombs, right? Because obviously as it sits, things come out of these bombs. So it was a class action lawsuit, imagine, in federal court. Yep. So it was the Lee Vista Square residential community, the Warwick subdivision, the Vista Lakes residential community, and the school board, all against Lennar for punitive damages and intentional misconduct and gross negligence. This was not the first lawsuit. Guess which was the other one that happened before this? Do you guys remember that story from Chad last week about building on the tires? Yeah. Can you guess who did that? Lennar. Still buying more communities. Yeah. That was another class action lawsuit. You gotta love this, right? You can't make this stuff up, guys. I'm telling you, it is insane. So this is the kind of thing that should have been handled, right? When they went ahead and should have done due diligence. So what the heck happened? All I know is I would not want to be the realtor who was responsible for that contract, right? Let's just put it that way. So this is where we have to jump into the fact of why we have due diligence, okay? Now, before we jump in, does anybody have any questions from anything we went over last week? If you do, speak now or forever hold your peace. Silence. Okay, good. Okay, we're moving on. So we're running over here. Property condition. So here it is. Seller will deliver the property to buyer in as-is condition, with conditions resulting from buyer's inspections and causing damages. If accepted, the seller will not engage in any permit activity that would materially affect the property's conditions without the buyer's prior written consent. So that means that the seller can't go ahead and start getting permits on the property or doing anything like that or trying to subdivide it during this purchase process. Because look, due diligence, especially if a builder is buying a large parcel of land, can go on for a long period of time, right? So it's really critical that the seller does not encumber the property or do anything during that period of time. Does that make sense? That's why that part of the contract says that right there. Now, let's look at this diligence period, okay? Because it's really important that we understand this. Buyer will, at buyer's expense, within, if left blank, 30 days. That is the minimum, guys. Seriously, if you're buying land, do not make that shorter. I mean, unless they're not going to build on it, unless you have the reports, or unless, I mean, there better be some really good reason. Now, let me ask you this too. Whose responsibility is it to do these tests? Is it yours? It's the buyer. And when the buyer says to you, okay, well, go ahead and go, what do I need to do? You go ahead and take care of it. Because don't think that's not going to happen, especially for your would-be investors, your first-time investors who want to be builders, because you're all getting them, right? And they want you to do it all. And those of you who have these wonderful servant hearts want to do it. Don't do it. It is not your scope. It's not within your scope. Anybody here soil engineers? No. Anybody here an engineer? No. Please do not act as if you are. That should be done by people outside of our scope. Okay, there are real people that do this. So let's read what this is. Okay, now it says, this is the language that is in the as-is contract. So after the effective date, so they have 30 days or however long you put in there, and in buyer's sole and absolute discretion, they can determine whether the property is suitable for their intended use. That is the point of this due diligence period. They can conduct a phase 1 environmental assessment and any other tests, analysis, surveys, investigations that the buyer deems necessary to determine if it's satisfactory for the property's engineering, architectural, and environmental properties, zoning restrictions, subdivision statutes, soil and grade, availability and access to public roads, water and other utilities, consistency with local, state, and regional growth management plans. That's a big one, guys. Especially, I know St. Cloud was changing their growth management plan for a long time there. And I wish that Susan was on, because I would ask her that question if they're done. That is a big thing. If the growth management plan has a road coming right up through that property, that may very well be the case. You need to look at that, but not you, your buyer. You can get those plans for them and give it to them, but it's their job. It's their responsibility to view that, not yours. Not your job to even tell them. They need to look at all those things. If they're changing the road system, which is what they were doing in St. Cloud and in Point Siena, they were changing all the roads over there. And if that was going to come right through there, and if they were going to either buy the land or take it through eminent domain, that's not on you. So if they buy a piece of property and then suddenly they're losing the property due to eminent domain, that's not your call. They should have done their due diligence, because it tells them that right here. Okay.
What if the buyer doesn't do the diligence all the way? With inspection done,
And what?
the day of closing coming, right on the corner. And
Have they missed the time frame?
not yet, but
Yeah.
if she didn't do the inspection, I don't know how much she has done.
Okay.
And then now the closing date is coming shortly, 3 days.
So you're
then
saying,
they, the buyer decided not to move forward?
if you had that the due diligence period was 30 days and you were going to close in 35 days, let's say, she can cancel for any reason for 30 days. That this is doesn't matter. This is the ultimate cancel for any reason clause. The ultimate cancel for any reason clause right here. Okay. In buyer's sole and absolute discretion, they can determine whether the property is suitable for their needs. They don't have to tell you why. They could just say, no, it's not suitable.
Really? Even if we
Doesn't matter. They don't have to have done one test.
post the closing date.
Doesn't matter. They could have sat on it the entire time. It's day 29 and they could, or day 30, and they could give you in writing, it has to be in writing. The property is not suitable for my desired needs, so in use, so I'm canceling.
In the last moment, they could-
Doesn't matter. You as the seller's agent, you as the seller can do nothing other than give them their money back. That is, this is the ultimate cancel for any reason clause. Now let's continue looking at the things they should be looking at, because that is the important thing. And I would suggest if you have a would-be investor, because that's what we have oftentimes, you read it with them. Because they're like, oh, well, it's just, a piece of land. Okay, well, remember, you want to look at environmental, zoning restrictions, soil and grade. I mean, if you're going to plan on building on it, for example, guys, you know what perk is? Percolation. Okay, this is a big one. You know where really it's big? Hello, Han. Grant your contract right there. Percolation means, especially really important here in Florida, because when we have rain, it doesn't just drizzle. It comes down like a torrential downpour, right? And if the water doesn't percolate, which means feed through the soil properly, it pools and it sits there and you get standing water. With standing water comes what? Insects. And insects comes bacteria and infection and ugly, nasty stuff, right? Bad stuff. So in Winter Garden and parts of Windermere, percolation of that soil is terrible. It's mucky. It doesn't perk well. So when the water comes in, it sits there, it pools. It's like this really weird, nasty kind of slimy stuff. It doesn't filter through the soil properly. And so it sits there. And what that means is no matter how you build so when you're putting your buildable lot and how you're going to build that home, the home plot, you have to build the soil up to the house, down from the house, because you got to make sure that the water doesn't intrude in the house. And that is the engineering plans given to you, right? When they build. But that is done, a lot of it from that soil grading. And there's a community right now that Element is building right on Conroy Windermere Road. Does everybody know that beautiful community? Conroy Windermere Road, right as you're coming off of Apopka Vineland on the right-hand side. Is representing it. But yeah. Element is the builder.
Yes.
I can tell you because Berta was representing a customer in there, and they have in their contract, they do not account for percolation of that soil. I know, because I tore the contract apart and I said, send this back to them. And I said, Phil, look at this thing. He said, Carrie, you should have been an attorney. I wrote that contract. Yeah, because it doesn't perk. And they don't want to be liable for it. These are multi-million-dollar properties, guys. So that means, and I'll tell you why, because in Bronson's Landing, we had 3 different engineers give us plans for those homes that we were selling over $1 million for this stupid, because the soil didn't perk well. And then we finally built it. And the ones in the middle, we had a really nice little area here with before the pool. Didn't matter because the perk test was still so bad. Even long after we closed, the water was coming up and going into their pool areas. We still redid all of that, took it all out at our cost. You know how much that cost on the line to do that? They didn't have to, but they did. And redid all of that and then redid the soil, the grading of those whole lots.
Did they do that there? We don't know. At Element.
I mean, it's in their contracts right now. If you are buying, you buy the land and then you buy the home. That's how it goes. It says right in there, it's not contingent on the soil.
But if when you do that soil test though, and it's not perking, so then you just bring in a ton more sand.
So what they're saying is that if it pools later on, they're not liable for that. That's why they're trying to say that. That's why they've excluded it. They've actually excluded it from their warranty. It's bad news bears. It's beautiful land, but they did it because they know that the soil doesn't perk. Now, if you don't know anything about percolation, you would have just gone over that part. You wouldn't even have noticed it. I saw that and I was like, oh my God, I know it's a mess because of what we went through at Bronson's Landing.
So, but that particular property though is right on the lake.
Water, it's even worse.
Water would just go down to the lake.
Well, what if the lake is full because of massive storm and the lake has risen and now the water is not pooling and now it's coming up and rising into the home. And now because it's a 7-year flood or whatever, right? You can have flooding in the house. They can't come after the builder. That's why they put it in there. Yep, I can tell you, Element. It's in their contract. So just so you know. Okay, that's percolation. These are things, guys, you got to understand if you're going to play in that industry. Now, that doesn't mean you do it. That means that they better understand that, because that's a big part about how you build. Because if they don't have that soil grading just right, especially here in Central Florida, that's a mess. That's going to be a warranty nightmare later. Big mess.
You find that in both.
Has nothing to do with zoning. No, has nothing to do with zoning. Has everything to do with how you build. When you are preparing your buildable lot, you have to prepare the soil of that lot, how the pitch of the land is. An engineer.
You bring an engineer.
The
to check.
engineers have to come and they have to devise how the pitch of that land should be set before they pour the concrete. That all has to be pre-planned, and they do it based on tests like a perk test.
So then, any time we purchase land, then we have to bring an engineer to check that,
You
no?
don't talk like that. Get that word out of your vocabulary. I gone. The buyer, if they're going to build, you better recommend they bring an engineer. Absolutely. If they're working with the builder should be bringing in the engineer. Okay, that's the whole point. But you don't ever take any responsibility over that.
Yeah.
You tend to have that I and the we and the thing. You need to get those out of your vocabulary, my friend.
No, if I buy, just my buyer.
Yes,
Bring.
absolutely. If you're going to plan your bill on this, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, I highly recommend you talk to your builder. If you don't have a builder, get an engineer to look at this.
Right.
Because if you're going to build in 5 years, what if this doesn't perk at all? What if you can't build what you want to build because of that? Because that's what happens. Or what if you can't build a pool because of the perk is so bad, right? You don't know. Could be. Okay, that is part of that, right? Very important stuff.
Okay, you said that zoning has nothing to do with it, but if it's zoned residential, does that mean that that soil is good already
Nope.
because it's zoned? Okay.
Nope. Bronson's Landing is a residential community and the soil was terrible. Good question though, Natia. Thank you.
Okay.
But no, if it's residential or even commercial, I mean, it has nothing to do with zoning. The zoning has to do with how the land can be used. What is the land use? Are they allowed to build density wise? That's zoning. Let's talk about zoning. That's a good question. So here's one. We had somebody who was buying, he wanted to sell rather. He owned in Hunter's Creek. I mean, seemed like an amazing parcel. Should have been what was like, I want to say, I don't remember, 15 buildable lots or something like that, 15 or 20. And he only had this thing, he was going to put a church on. He even got the zoning changed. So he'd get the, what do they call it? I can't think of it off the top of my head. So that he could use it as a church, so he didn't have to pay the taxes, but it's, I can't think of the name, but you know what I'm talking about. Anyway, so he decided he wanted to sell it. So we said, well, let's go see what the density. So does anybody know what I say density is?
Yeah. How many units per?
How many units per acre or per parcel, or however they divide it up, are you allowed to build? Right? Because initially it was, let's say 15. I don't really remember because there was some wet on it too, right? Well, we went to the county and you know what we found out? Now we did that because we were getting ready to list it. That's why we went to the county. If we were representing the buyer, do we want to be responsible of that? No. You want them to go to the county. Because if we go to the county and we're wrong and we're responsible for that, you don't want that. You want the buyer to go, right? It's a responsibility thing. Like you can always go check, but then you got to make them responsible. You go tell them to go check. Because as soon as you say it, you own it. But if it's a listing, we can go look, right? Because we're going to list this. We want the information. We went down to zoning and we found out that this whole time while he was waiting, like, I don't know, 5 or 7 years to build this church, well, all these communities around him built up. And the county granted all the communities around him all the density. He had density for 2 units. Yeah, so all this acreage is now useless. What are you going to sell for now? It's two, that was it, 2 buildable lots. That's all it was worth now. One's 15 now in the middle of Hunter's Creek. Could you imagine? This could have been worth a fortune. And it was once, you know, it was already like a PUD. It already had gone through all of the zoning that it needed, except for the special exemption that it had for the church. That's really all you could sell for now. That was all it was good for, the church. So you can't just go by what you see in public records. Public records said it was a PUD approved for like 15 units. Yeah, except not anymore, because during that whole period of time, the county gave away their density. No, because so density is per area, right? And so that would be part of a master plan of that area. So that area has already exhausted based on roads, based on schools, so the zoning and the density is for multiple things, not just because the land usage, it's because of the utilities, the services. It could also be, not just the roads and the schools, but also maybe the public, do they think that the sewages can handle it? Do they think that the water can handle it? So there's a variety of reasons of why they give a certain amount of density to an area. And it wouldn't make sense oftentimes for a county to go and change that because it would cost them too much to do that. So maybe if you went to a public hearing, but what other person who lives there is going to want to give you more density and it's going to cost them more in their taxes? Right? Because if you have to increase, let's say fire and because that's how that goes, right? Your millage might have to increase because you have more people now for fire and, all that kind of thing. Do you think people are going to be willing to pay more money so you have more usage? No, right? That's the problem. So these are all really interesting things. So just because you see it in public records, don't assume that that's still accurate, because it very well may not be. Interesting, right? Here's another one. These things change all the time. So my father-in-law has 5 acres down in Naples, and this 5 acres has a lot of natural fauna and flora on this beautiful baby, and some good amount of wet on there too, although it never looks wet, but there is some wetness. I mean, it's Naples, right? So they keep changing all the time how much you can clear. And now the only way you can clear this, because the zoning restrictions, they say in this area, it can only go down to 2-acre lots. So we can only cut it in half, but that's okay. We've been used to that one. But now, so that's only can be 2, right? 2 parcels now. But now they're saying per each parcel, you can only clear for buildable lots 1 acre of it. So could you imagine? So that's only 2 acres out of 5 that could be buildable now. Used to be 5, you could clear the whole thing. Now they can't, they say the rest you have to keep natural. They keep changing these things. So that's another thing. That's the environmental side of that. That's not for any reason other than utilities or anything like that. That's the environmental side getting in there, saying, no, you have to keep the natural fauna and flora crap. Beauty.
Just thinking
Beauty. Yeah.
Well, same with lakefront.
Yeah.
View. They don't want you to hear anything. You think you have all
Yep.
this view and you don't.
What do you want to say, Emily?
everything.
Oh, I was just saying, like, if you already had the plans before, if you
Doesn't matter.
grandfathered in,
Nope.
that's, yeah.
Even if it was approved, if you didn't act on it, nope.
So
If
time
you
is
would
of the
have
essence.
times of the essence, if you would have done it, you could be grandfathered in. For example, to your point with the lakes, all over Central Florida have been deemed that you have to maintain natural fauna and flora. You're not allowed to have a beach. That has been changed. I know. But anywhere that people had a beach could have been grandfathered in, to your point. So in our community, we have a lake, right? And so there was this one holdout that he was not taking off his beach. And the EPA kept coming in and coming in. His fines were over $10,000, just the fines, never mind the cost to actually pull out his beach and put them, you had to pay to put that fauna and flora in the right proportion of what should be there. So ugly. Yeah. 10,000 just in fines because he
Well,
was
and
just
then
being
the
a jerk.
docks are so expensive to go over.
Because you got to go over
Yeah.
the natural fauna and flora.
Yeah.
Mhm. And he had it like that, but he didn't ever get it permitted or anything like that. So they didn't care. EPA, if the EPA is involved, you're out of luck. That's the problem. Uh-huh.
What's going on with so many, apartments for rent in Orlando, like never seen, is this like part of the master plan? That is because like Windermere or Winter Garden became like an apartment, master.
So interesting that you say that because Windermere actually, actually not Windermere. Horizon West did not allow for any apartments. It was not written in the master plan. It actually excluded it. And what happened was when the market crashed, Lakeside was all condos, and they had, remember before it crashed, supposedly like 2,400 people on their list. BS, that was never true. Thank you, Ashton Woods. And only about 30 some odd people closed. And so these poor people spent $300,000-400,000 on a condo. It was 3 bedrooms. They were so over. And the problem was that nobody could even buy in there because there was not enough. The investor ratio was so bad, you know, the investor homeowner ratio. You couldn't even get a loan in there because nobody bought. So they were sitting on it. So what happened was, it was the person who owned the building. They owned all of the units. They built all of the units. He owned it, so he rented the units out, just like another building, very, very popular building downtown called The View. Same thing. So it wasn't considered an apartment. It was really that it was an owner who was renting it like an investment. That's how he got around that restriction. And then it becomes grandfathered in, and then because he gets away with it, other people start doing it, and then they make the change to the master plan, and it suddenly becomes allowed. That's how that happened.
Just going down to,
Mhm.
you know, the road. Avalon, there's thousands of apartments.
Mhm.
Always.
Yeah. And do you
They're
know?
like, oh, no, the house is down.
Do you know, I mean, well, I actually wood frame is now allowed.
Yeah.
They have made a change to the building code. So back after the hurricanes in 2004, they changed the code that the whole first floor had to be concrete, right? And you had to pour every, I think it was 6 feet. Was it 6 feet, Denise? I think it was every 6 feet. Oh, you're. It was every 6 feet because they used to only pour the corners, and then you had to pour every 6 feet. Mary Jo on? So then what happened was, about, I think it was 2 years ago, it was due to the shortages of supposedly concrete. They changed our code rules and said that you can now build wood. Why? Because the hurricanes are better? No, they did it because of the inavailability supposedly of concrete. So now you're going to buy a wood frame because you can get it, but you're safer. I'm sorry, that's ridiculous. But anyway, yeah, that's why they changed the code. But previous to that, you could only see wood in apartments. Do you know the difference? Why? Condos were always at least first floor concrete because of the code, as it should have been. But apartments could be wood because they're commercial. And when it's a commercial property, the idea is that they don't have to protect the public, right? Because it's commercial. Although that's ridiculous because who's going to live there? The public, right? So it's all about money. All of this stuff. It's ridiculous. Okay, so let's keep going, shall we? Yeah, all ridiculousness. Okay, so let's also look at this, guys. You also have to look at the availability, access to public roads, water, and other utilities, consistency with licensing, other inspections that the buyers deem appropriate. If the property must be rezoned, the buyer will be required to file. Who will? The buyer. It's not the seller who files for the rezoning. It's the buyer who files for the rezoning with the appropriate government agency. The seller signs the documents that the buyer is required to file, but it's the buyer who does it. The seller gives the buyer, its agents or contractors, and the signs the right to enter the property during the due diligence for the purposes of conducting all these inspections. But the buyer and its agents and the contractors and the signs, they conduct it at their own risk. So if anything happens, they cannot sue the seller while they're at the site. The buyer also indemnifies and holds the seller harmless for anything that could possibly happen during this whole process. And the buyer will not engage in any activity that could result in the construction lien being filed on the property. So they can't start building or doing anything that would cause any kind of lien. The buyer will, at the buyer's expense, repair all damages to the property resulting from any inspections that had happened and release all reports and other work generated from the results of the inspections. So they're supposed to give these reports to the seller. It says it right in here. Can you negotiate that? You can, but you have to negotiate it at the time of contract. You can't afterwards, after the fact, after they've signed this, say, well, we're not going to give it to you. Because they already agreed to it, right? You've already agreed that if you want to get out, you have to give them the reports you said you would. It says it right in here. Now, before the expiration of the due diligence period, the buyer must deliver written notice to the seller, written, whether or not they plan the property is acceptable. So it has to say that. Not we're going to continue, we're not going to continue. Is the property acceptable or not? Okay. The buyer's failure to comply with that notice means that they're accepting it as is. If the property is unacceptable and they did it in timely notice, then it's, then they get their money back and everything ends. So everybody clear on that? Yeah.
I do have a question. I don't know, maybe, you're covering it later, or maybe we're talking about, but when we go back to line 145,
Okay.
or actually a little bit before, availability of access to public roads. I know we kind of talked about this before because there was a lot and it was kind of in the middle of other lots and not on a road.
Mm-hmm.
And people are, you said that there's a problem with like listing that for access, but people do list them. So they are listed by other people in the middle of other lots.
So they cannot legally, that's if it's an illegal listing, they should be put in for a violation.
I don't know what qualifies that, if there's like a dirt road or.
Well, so that's where you have to ask the listing agent. Do
Okay.
you have legal egress and ingress, which means legal entry and exit to the property?
How would you find that? Where would that be?
They actually have to have it. It's an actual document that's recorded with the county or the state or the city, wherever the property, it's city or, county or state, city, excuse me. And so it would be recorded, giving them access. So oftentimes if it's in a community, that comes as part of the community documents, that they have access to this one main dirt road. A lot of times you'll see that in these rear entry communities, they all have access to that one rear entry road. It's in the deeded documents. And so everybody has access to the same road, that kind of thing. But we have seen plenty of times where they don't have access and they've just been driving on a neighbor's property who doesn't live there. That doesn't give you actual legal right to use it. So it actually has to be written and recorded, and then they'd have to actually go to that neighbor and get that legal right to use, which means they have to get an attorney involved. They have to get the legal right of way usage and get that recorded before they could sell it. Because you can't close on a property that they cannot use.
Is it different if they list it as recreation?
No, because how do you get to it?
Yeah.
Doesn't matter what you call it. I mean, you know what I mean? Because
Yeah.
just to be able to sell something, a sellable parcel of land must, and it says it right in the contract, must have egress and ingress, which
Yeah.
means you must be able to get to and from it without going on someone else's land illegally.
So that whole due diligence of that would be part of this as well.
Exactly.
But you
Mhm.
might
If
not
they
know
s-
it, because there might be a dirt road and you might be like, oh,
Exactly.
that's another
Mhm.
thing. That, the buyer.
Yeah, exactly. The buyer has to look at all of those things. But there's more than just a phase one, environmental one. There's a phase two and a phase three. So depending on how much building they're going to be doing, we'll see how much of the phases that they need to do. Because like Lennar, do they even do a phase one? I highly doubt it, because clearly 400 bombs, you missed that one. Now, to find out that there was actually toxins in the soil, you might have needed to do a phase two, right? Because it's the depth at which they're going down looking at things. But other things you can find, turtles, Indian artifacts, burial grounds, you find these things, you can't build. Now, if you find turtles, you can rehome them if there's not too many of them, but that's very expensive. That costs you to rehome these turtles. If you find Indian artifacts, you cannot build. If you find burial grounds, you cannot build. So what does that mean? You bought land that you cannot do anything with.
Question. So do you know about the whole Longleaf in Oakland?
Oh, no, do tell.
So they built Longleaf in Oakland and like right off the tree and everything, there was graveyard.
Huh.
So between the town of Oakland and Pulte, well, when we had a lot of rain and stuff, they were floating.
No.
So it was a big thing and they had to put in a whole new drainage and stuff like that. So now it's been very quiet since they've done all that. I don't even know where they're at on the lawsuit. So they didn't do, Pulte didn't do their,
Environmentals either.
right? So, but it was already there. They knew it was a cemetery. So how does that, it's just the drainage, I guess.
So
how
the
does that
difference
work?
is they might have done their phases, but like, let's say they just didn't do anything to block off
Uh-huh.
their stuff to come into theirs. Then that's really not that they bought the land that had the remains on it, right? And truly, that really should have been the job, if you will, of the cemetery to do that. So now Pulte has to do more to basically do the job of the cemetery because they didn't do it, right? So it really shouldn't even be a lawsuit against Pulte, in my opinion. Now, again, I don't know enough about it,
Right.
but from the way you're describing it, I mean, unless there actually were remains where they built,
Right, right.
I mean, that's different. And you would know that because you could see if they did. Now, I could tell you because Susan has been in a deal with D.R. Horton for like forever, and they were doing phase 1, phase 2. I think they even went to phase 3. Most builders do their due diligence. Centerline, we did development too. So a lot of builders don't like to do development. They'd rather buy land that's already developed. Development is a lot of work. And there's so many things that could go wrong. But we were buying land that was down by actually Austin Tyndall Park. We built the lands at North Shore there. And we were going to buy the parcel that was behind it where the fish camp is. Because it was right on East Lake Toho. We were going to put luxury homes there. Which, by the way, we had all those people that were living in these, what were supposed to be recreational, just like, week long, who lived there, who had their trailers up on cement blocks, which is a huge violation, by the way. They were picketing us, yes, because we were kicking them out of their homes, special. But we did our environmentals and found a ton of turtles. So we were like, forget this. We don't even want that. First of all, we're getting picketed by these Looney Tunes. And secondly, I kept coming over to my home site and I'm like, this is ridiculous. I'm being picketed by these people. But more work, more importantly, it would have cost us so much money and we didn't even like touch much of it. So imagine if we saw the amount of turtles we saw where we saw them.
Yeah.
There was probably much worse where, there's certain things that other type of land, live animals and things that you can find that you cannot move. One of the things that Susan was saying, I think they're called skeeters or something. You can't move those things. So horrible. So there are skeeters or something. I don't know what they are, but
Is that a bird?
I don't know what they are.
Oh.
She was mentioning them. I'm not sure. But there's like a whole list of things that you can't touch. So that's the thing. You have to do these tests and you don't want to find them as you're, if you didn't do them during due diligence and you're now developing, you're going to find them then. What do you do? Because you can't sell property like that because you
want it.
Well, exactly. So these are all the reasons.
Environmentalists want it. That's
Yeah,
fine.
and you won't make a thing off of it though, because they don't want to pay anything, right? So this is the stuff you guys got to know. But you cannot be responsible. The other big one is zoning, guys. Do not plan to be zoning experts. You can always call the zoning board. You can always go down there, but you are not the person responsible for that. There are attorneys who handle zoning. That's who should be doing the zoning changes, not you guys, right? You are not zoning experts. Do not leave it in your hands to do that. You can always call them and say, this is what I've gotten from the zoning committee. This is what I recommend that you do. Hire someone to do the zoning. You can tell them what the information that you got, and that's it. You are not responsible for it because that is where big trouble comes from. If somebody wants to build a development and they ask you what the land use is, well, currently it's this, but the future land use says you can build a PUD. It's agricultural now, but it can be. Well, do I just change it? Is it definitely in the future of this plan? It is, but you have to do a public hearing. Well, God help you if that's the case. Public hearings are a nightmare. I've had to do that. They're horrible. You don't want to be involved in that. And every county and city is different in how they do their zoning. Nobody is the same. Nobody even uses the same codes because that would be too easy. So there are maps that you can go on and we can show you where you can see future land use and they show you what's coming and they show you what's planned. Those are great informational things that you can share with your customers. But again, you are sharing the information, but you cannot be responsible for that information. Okay, because this is not your specialty. This is not what we do. Everybody good with that? Okay, no due diligence period. I highly recommend that you never do that. Why would you say no due diligence? The buyer is satisfied with the property, it's suitable for the buyer's purposes, including public sewage water is available at the property, or they will be approved for the installation of the well or private sewage. How will you know that if you've not even done a day? And that the existing zoning and the pertinent regulations, restrictions such as subdivision or deed restrictions are concurrency, growth management, environmental conditions are acceptable to the buyer. Unless you've been given all of the studies from the previous person that just went through and they're okay with that.
So I had a buyer who lived in the house next to the land,
Uh-huh.
and they weren't gonna use me if I did not let them do that. And like, I'm looking, be next to me, I don't care what's on that
Oh,
property, that kind of thing. and
they
also-
weren't gonna build it, they weren't gonna do
They
anything on it.
just didn't want a neighbor, they just wanted.
It's
to-
fine. In that
I
case,
did it. Yeah.
well, in that case, it's a different scenario. But if they want to build on it or do something on it, don't let them sign that. That's ridiculous. That's like letting someone buy a house and not do an inspection. And if they do that, make them sign a hold harmless. I mean, in that case, I understand that. That's like whatever. Okay. Changes in the government regulations and levels of service which affect the buyer's intended use of the property will not be grounds for terminating this contract, guys. If the due diligence period expires. So this is why it is critical that you see what is going to be happening. That's why you've got to look at that and make them look at that. Because let's say they knew they were going to put a road coming up the way and you didn't have them look at that and you didn't call the town and you didn't find any of these things out. And then they are in the middle of, they pass the due diligence period and now they find that out and they're like, what? I don't want to buy this anymore. Well, that's not a reason they can terminate. Now they're going to lose their deposit.
That's a lot to look into.
For the
Buying
buyer, not for you,
Step by step process.
but the
of due
buyer
diligence.
should know that. And they should have an attorney who does that for them. Not you, an attorney. So I highly recommend you get with an attorney like Phil or somebody else who is used to doing this type of due diligence. If you got somebody who's buying, who wants to build, they should be working with an attorney.
Yeah.
Because if there is zoning changes, if there is any of these things, they should be working with engineers. Yeah. So, I mean, you should be familiar and understand what this stuff is, but you have to understand what you shouldn't know, what you don't want to be responsible for. That's the most important thing. Don't talk out of school because it'll get you in big trouble. Okay, flood zone, the buyer is advised to verify this survey with the lender and with the appropriate governmental agencies. I'm going to tell you, a lot of times in vacant land, I see people wanting to use the old surveys and just have it recertified. I don't recommend that necessarily. Just get a new survey. How much are you really saving? I mean, really probably not a lot. And, you know, things could have changed. So I don't know. I don't, it's not a great idea. We don't have the coastal construction line, so that doesn't matter. Here's now, this is the closing procedure. The closing takes place in the county where the property is located, so similar. If title insurance insures the buyer for title effects arising between the title binder effective date and recording the buyer's deed, the closing agent disperses at closing the net sale proceeds to the seller. If the seller requests in writing at least 5 days before closing, the brokerage fees to the broker, then those expenses provided in the contract will be paid as follows. So this is where the breakdown is. The seller pays the taxes on the deed, the recording fees for the documents to cure title if that needs to be done, title evidence, estoppel fees, and this is where you can write in other things. Buyer pays the taxes, the recording fees on the deed and the financing, loan expenses, title evidence, and that depends on who's paying for what, lender's title, inspection, survey, and insurance. Now remember, depending on who selected what here, in the beginning of time, it tells you right down here in section 8, seller or buyer will be picking who's closing. Are they using a title company or the attorney or whoever? And who is paying for the owner's policy, right? And are you getting the title insurance or you're getting an abstracted title, but you have to pick one or two. If you don't, what are we getting? Mhm.
Would you suggest they use their own title as the buyer?
You know, oftentimes, especially when I did commercial, I always suggested to my buyer that they pay the money to pay the owner's title policy and they hold their own money, always, because the person who holds the money holds the power. So a lot of times, a lot of commercial deals I was doing were very high dollar, multi-million. And I didn't want that money, especially in South Florida where it was the Wild West, to be in some crazy seller's hands. So yeah, I always, and I had attorneys that I worked with and I always made them put it in their money
So
there.
like Phil would do stuff like that.
You could talk to Phil here for sure. I mean, and then they would do the closing and then we would pay the owner's policy.
Okay.
I wouldn't make the seller pay it, we would pay it. I would tell the buyer, you're gonna pay extra money, you're gonna pay the owner's policy because you want to be in control of your money, don't you? That's how I would describe it
It
to them.
seems like it might be.
A $250,000 lot, it might not be that big a deal,
Okay.
right? If you're buying a $2.5 million lot, right? It depends on what you're buying. But that's the thing. That's my advice I always use for my buyers. Whoever holds the money holds the power. Do you want to be in the power position here? Who's going to say no to that? Then I said, well, there's a cost to have the power. It's your own title policy. Then I give them a basic price on that. So it's going to cost you a little more, but then you get to hold your own money. Or you can give all that power away to the seller, let them hold your money. But then if something goes wrong, they're going to do everything they can to keep your money. They may be entitled to it, they may not, but they're going to try to keep your money. Do you want to pay the extra money and have more control over your money or not? Who's going to say no? It's how you present it, but you have to present it. You can't not talk about it. And then at the end, they're like, what do you mean I'm paying money? I mean, that's the difference. You got to let them pick always. That's the most important thing. Whenever it's a contract, this is the number one problem. Agents don't explain it and they don't let the customers pick. You got to let them pick. Does that mean that, I could be honest, was I a little bit persuasive? Perchance? Was I clearly a little bit on the side of, what are you crazy? Keep your money to yourself? Yes. But could she have said, my top 8, I have this one buyer, Jenny. She's from Peru. I ever tell you about Jenny? Oh my gosh. I knew she was wealthy. She bought a lot from me, a lot. She had a lot of money. But the first time I went to Peru, she wanted to show me around. She would buy a lot of land to build what's called a cancha, which is an 8-on-8 or a 6-on-6 little soccer thing. So she wanted to show me some of hers. She had like 20 some odd in Peru, in Lima. So anyway, I go to meet her at, I thought one of hers, it was like on the top floor of one of the buildings. So it was just like this whole block of like stores and shops. And so she's in the top one. I'm like, oh, she's up there. She owned the whole thing. Yeah, everyone's like, you know Jenny? Like, yeah, she's my cousin. Everywhere I went, she's like, this is my broker. She's my broker. I was like famous. Of course, too, I'm a gringo, right? They love that. She toured me around to all these things. I was like, oh, everyone's like, oh, Jenny. Yeah, she's my customer. Yeah, we were in Brickell City Center and she bought, I think 2 or 3 just on the site. And then she called her friends. She's like, this is the best place. They bought them right on the spot too. because she was buying them. I'm like, grab a couple more contracts. Jenny's got some friends. She's a good customer. I should call Jenny, shouldn't I? What is Jenny doing? That crazy Jenny. Yeah,
Crazy rich Jenny.
crazy rich Jenny. Yeah. All right. So prorations, the following items will be current. We know we prorate as of the day before closing date, which is interesting. And this is how they tell you what they're prorating. Obviously, we know what they're doing. Interest bonds, assessments, leases, all of that goodies. Special assessments by a public body. Regarding special assessments imposed by the public body, seller will pay either in full the amount of liens certified, confirmed, ratified, or closing, the amount of the last estimate of the assessment of the improvements substantially completed by the effective date, but has not resulted in a lien before closing, and the buyer will pay the amounts after. You have to select. Okay. And then it says, if the special assessment may be paid in installments, the seller or the buyer will pay after closing. You guys see that? I would always like to say the seller has to pay it, but truly, more than likely, if there really are installments after closing, it's probably going to want the buyer to pay it after closing. But this is something I have seen oftentimes not been checked. And then there really are special assessments. And they're all going, well, who's paying for it? You have to understand that this has to be, an election has to be made. It's just like in the regular contract. Oftentimes I see that not selected either. But here in land, sometimes we actually have special assessments. I'd say probably more frequently than actually in the regular purchase.
So who taking care of
Well, it depends.
that?
It's
Like
the seller either pays for everything before and then will pay the installments after closing, or the seller pays for everything before and the buyer pays after closing. That's what you have to negotiate. But this has to be a conversation. It also depends on who you're representing, right? So that's how I look at that. Okay, they're letting you know that the property taxes can't be relied on the current amount. We all know that, what happens with property, right? And here it goes with FERPTA. If the seller is a foreign person, they have to comply with FERPTA. FERPTA still applies with land. Okay, and we have next Monday our FERPTA CE class, 2 hours, and I'm gonna have lunch, okay? 1031, if it's a 1031 like-kind exchange, either simultaneous close or after, it tells you right here, the party will cooperate with the reasonable timing. That's really what this is about. If it's a 1031, timing is critical, time is of the essence, and you're just saying that you understand, you're not going to delay for any reason, you're just going to really try to keep everything timely. That's really all this is. And it's the same thing, by the way, in a residential contract, but there is an actual addenda that says that. We already went through the computation of time. Can anyone share with me what the computation of time is? Is it calendar or a business days?
Calendar.
Really? Is that what it says? Except time periods of 5 days or less. That is the most important change, guys. So that affects what? Your money, your deposit. It could, there's certain things that, like, what if you put, God forbid you, I would kill you if you did a due diligence for 5 days, but don't. But it definitely can affect certain things. So if the time period is 5 days or less, that's business days. That is so old. They used to have that in the residential
Just
contract.
yeah, this is just for the land.
Just land.
5
but-
days or less. Yeah, for the lot.
So if you had an effective agreement on Thursday, normally if it was say 3 days, it would be due Friday, you would count Saturday, Sunday, so it'd be due Monday, right? But because in the land contract, it's less than 5 days, you don't count Saturday and Sunday. So it'd be Friday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, it'd be due Thursday. I know. Totally messed up there. Mhm. It's a big one. That's why I wanted to point it out again. I pointed out last time, it's important. This one's important, and this one you don't see normally. Risk of loss for eminent domain. Does everybody know what eminent domain is? Anybody not know what it is? You know what it is, Karina? Okay. You sure? Just in case, let me share what it is. So,
When
I'm gonna
they
give
want
you,
to build on the
no. Here's the story of eminent domain. It'll be an interesting story. In Windermere, there were 3 farmers that own where the high school is. The one little land where they built the shopping plaza and the 2 parcels where the high school is. Okay. And the school, for some stupid reason, wanted to put the school there. The school, the Department of Education wanted to put the school there. They should have put it by the middle school, but that's like a whole nother story. So they wanted to buy those parcels and the farmers didn't want to sell. The only one who wanted to sell, their brothers, by the way, was the one where we built the Aldi and the, the Abagabe Azul and all that. That's the only one who wanted to sell. He also wanted to make it commercial. That was not commercial. All of that land there was supposed to be part of the residential plan because you only could build homes there. That's how it was zoned. You couldn't build a school and you could not build commercial. So the school board supposedly went to the county and said, hey, unincorporated Orange County, if we took this land, because the farmers won't sell it to us, through eminent domain, which is a police power basically through things like schools and cities to build roads. And they have to pay for it for the just price of the market, but they are allowed to take whatever land they want for the good of the better of the county, right, or the area. That's the idea. If we take this land, are you going to change the zoning? And supposedly they said yes. So they took the one through eminent domain. No, they bought one, sorry. They bought the first parcel, a couple million. Then the next guy wouldn't sell, so they said, can we do that one? And they said, okay, they did, took that one through eminent domain. So the second parcel, they took through eminent domain. Meanwhile, they're bush hogging and you know how much all that stuff costs. So they're now into all this for millions of dollars. The guy in the end is super happy because he now knows once they change the zoning, he's going to get the grandfather right to change the zoning over here, make this commercial, which completely changed the master plan for Horizon West, and now it's a lawsuit against the communities all around it because they're changing the master plan because none of this is supposed to be school or supposed to be commercial. Yeah.
So the commercial guy just got left out.
Totally. So what happens was finally they go through the eminent domain process. Now they have both parcels. They go back to the county, and they say, okay, we're ready. We need to change this to the school zoning. And they say, no, we told you this is residential. You can't make this a school. Ensues the lawsuit. Yeah, the lawsuit went on. So Windermere High School was supposed to open in 2017. No, I lied. No, 2016, my son graduated. It was supposed to open in 2013. That school, my kids graduated from there, not really, but 2020. So 2019, 2017, it opened in 2016. It was 3 years delayed because of lawsuits. That county ended up suing the school board saying you have to, it became this huge thing. And the schools, the counties, the communities all around were suing it. It was this huge, ridiculous thing. And that's why the football field is not even on site.
Well, couldn't the school of eminent domain and taken that commercial parcel?
They didn't want it because they would have had to pay for it. Just eminent domain doesn't mean you get it for free. They have already spent millions upon millions of dollars buying land that they never should have bought because they had the land next to the middle school, Bridgewater Middle School, where they already had deemed to build a park over there, which they could have had that in between the high school and the middle school. That would have been the smart place to put the school. But whatever idiot was in charge of the schools at that time decided that they wanted to build it over there. How stupid. And they could have put the field right there too.
Yeah.
But no, stupidity. We all pay for that. That's eminent domain. There you go. Now you'll always remember eminent domain. All right, so force majeure, remember we talked about the force majeure is in here, but it doesn't give you an actual time frame of how long they will extend the contract, which is really weird because in our residential contract, it tells you how long they're extending it for once the eminent domain, whether the hurricane is stopped, whether the fact that you have no electricity, now you have electricity. Here, it does not give you that. It just says if it goes beyond 30 days, they can cancel the contract. So that's why in this particular contract, not residential, If you have a situation where not eminent domain, got eminent domain on the brain now. Force majeure has prevented you from doing something, either an inspection or insurance or something, write an addenda where all parties agree to extend it for whatever period. It will not counteract this force majeure because this force majeure is so poor. It's really washed down. Okay, everybody good with that? The only thing it did do, remember, was it extended your closing for 5 days. Totally weird. All notices have to be in writing, as you know. Complete agreement, persons bound. This entire agreement is between the buyer and seller, except for the brokerage agreement. And there are no prior agreements that will bind seller, buyer, broker units incorporated in this contract. So what this is really about is people trying to squeeze into the contract. Modifications of this contract will not be binding unless in writing. Electronic signatures are accepted. And handwrittens obviously will supersede this. The buyer and seller use diligence and good faith in performing all obligations of this contract. And the term seller, buyer, and broker may be singular and plural. Now they're telling you default resolution. If the seller defaults, if they neglect to perform, the buyer may receive a return of their deposit and thereby waive any action for damages resulting from seller's breach. So that's what they're saying. And they may seek to recover such damages or seek specific performance. So here they're saying they have all 3 possibilities. The seller will also be liable for the full amount of the brokerage fee. So if the buyer cancels their contract, the brokers are getting paid. The seller can sue for specific performance. They can sue for damages. They can sue for everything. They can go after the deposit. So this is a much stronger contract. Understand that. If the buyer fails to, that's if the seller defaults. So if your seller says, I don't want to sell anymore, you, the listing agent, are getting paid. The buyer's agent's getting paid. Okay. And the buyer's going to either they can go for specific performance, they can go for damages, because those phase 1s are expensive. So all those tests that they had run, they're going to go seek damages for that. I can guarantee you that. If the buyer neglects or refuses to perform under this contract, the seller may elect to get their deposits. They can also go for liquidated damages, and they can also seek to enforce their rights under this contract, which is specific performance. In litigation, the prevailing party is entitled to recover the other party's fees. So that's another thing. It's more like a commercial contract in this sense. You guys see that? Can I get through this contract when I'm almost done? I am. Let's just get through real quick. Broker liability. Broker advises seller and buyer to verify all facts, representations that are important to them and to consult the appropriate professionals. Guys, please read this to your customers. They have to go to the professional for status, for foreign investors, for reporting requirements, for the effects of the property lying partially and totally in sewers, for taxes, for property conditions, for environmentals, for other specialized advice. That's not us. The buyer acknowledges that all representations by the broker are based on seller representations or public record. The buyer agrees to rely solely on the seller and professional inspectors, governmental agencies for verification of the property conditions and facts that materially affect the property. The seller and buyer respectively will pay all costs, expenses, including reasonable attorney fees at all levels incurred by the broker and the broker's officers, directors, blah, 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 arising from a misstatement or failure to perform contractual obligations. So they're saying they're going to pay that. The seller and buyer hold harmless and release the broker and their officers from any liability or loss of damage. The seller and the buyer's misstatement or failure to perform contractual obligations or use to display the listing data third parties are but not limited to photographs, graphic images, videos, that kind of thing. Broker's performance at seller's or buyer's request of any task beyond the scope of services regulated by Chapter 475. That is also covered in there. So what they're saying here, guys, is they're trying to hold us harmless of everything. Don't think they still can't sue you, because they can. Okay. I have heard horror stories at legal summits where one broker was being sued from a commercial contract that he was no longer even a part of. He got held up in court for 5 years. He won. How much money did he spend to fight, trying to fight that guy? And time and energy. And he wasn't even involved in it anymore. I know. So then down here, you put who the brokers are. The selling brokers, the listing brokers. And this is the addenda, a backup contract, a kick-out clause, and additional terms. Additional terms, be very careful what you're writing in here. Let's always go to an attorney. We don't just write up additional terms, especially when it comes to land, especially if it has anything to do with due diligence, especially if it has anything to do with zoning or anything like that. We have to be very careful what we write because you probably aren't going to be covered. Okay, everybody good with that? All right, we made it through. Woo! Okay, so Thursday, keep in mind, I'm going to be doing interviews for our new regional marketing director. I'm excited, so no training. And Monday we have FERPTA.
Oh,
CE
good.
credits, yes. So it'll be a 10 to 12. Andrea had her baby.
What day?
She had the baby on Thursday. It was what? It was the 16th. It was Thursday. And today is her birthday. And Jessica won because little Max was 7 pounds even. Yes, he's so cute. So that's exciting stuff. So we hope she's doing good. No, you didn't. It was Jessica. We have the list. Okay, well, no. I don't know. We'll have to see John's list. Okay, well, I'm gonna say goodbye to everybody. Thanks for coming, guys. Bye.